3 years ago, a nun blocked my path inside a Sicilian convent. "You cannot see it," she said. "Why not?" "Because the last time someone read it aloud, she screamed for 3 days. I looked anyway. Tonight, I'm showing you that letter and 4 other objects history tried to bury. I'm cat witness, and I'm watching." Devil's Letter of Sister Maria. It was just after dawn on August 11th, 1676. The other nuns found Sister Maria collapsed on the stone floor of her cell, her face smeared with black ink. An inkwell lay overturned on her legs, as if the writing had been done while she was lying on the floor, not seated at a desk. In her trembling hand, she clutched a single sheet, 14 lines long, written in an alphabet no one could read. She claimed it had been dictated by Satan himself. For more than 3 centuries, no one could prove her wrong. Born Isabella Tomasi, daughter of a Sicilian prince and sister to a future cardinal and saint, Maria grew up in a family where holiness was expected. Nearly every Tomasi child entered religious life. At 15, Isabella became Sister Maria and withdrew behind the convent walls, devoting herself to prayer, fasting, and penance. But she soon claimed a darker presence followed her inside. Whenever she approached an altar, witnesses said she screamed and collapsed, writhing as if seized. At night, she claimed the devil spoke to her, and eventually he demanded she write. What emerged was a letter so strange that even trained scholars were baffled. I contacted Daniele Abate, the computer scientist who finally cracked the code in 2017. He made a call. I got 30 minutes inside the convent. That's how I ended up holding a 346-year-old letter in a stone room where photography was forbidden. At first glance, it resembles shorthand, the kind used by scribes or spies, not cloistered nuns. Its symbols form a tangle of Greek, Latin, Arabic, runic, and possibly Yazidi characters. Only one word is immediately legible: oimi. Convent records say Satan demanded she sign the letter. Sister Maria refused, instead writing O, Latin for alas. The rest of the letter's contents remain locked away, a secret code, until 2017. That year, a Bates team in Sicily fed the letter into code-breaking software reportedly sourced from intelligence agencies. They primed it with alphabets Maria may have known and analyzed repeating symbols to isolate structure. They expected fragments. Instead, full sentences emerged. The encrypted text was blasphemous. God, Jesus, and the Holy Spirit were dismissed as dead weights in some translations. The letter claimed humans invented the prophet Zoroaster and even God himself. The system works for no one, it said. God thinks he can free mortals. Perhaps now Styx is certain. The river Styx, the boundary between the living and the dead in Greek mythology, seemed in the letter's logic to await mankind instead of the promised heaven and hell. To modern researchers, the message resembles the fragmented but patterned thinking of schizophrenia or bipolar disorder. The image of the devil is often present in these conditions, Abate noted, citing records of Maria screaming through the night, wrestling invisible forces. Yet the symbols repeat with precision. The code shows design and a deep understanding of ancient languages. Sister Maria's letter remains sealed inside the convent in Sicily. She received 2 more messages from Satan, but refused to write them down. Whatever spoke through her pen never fully finished the conversation. The Mirror of Floren. In a museum gallery in Dresden, Germany, surrounded by telescopes and brass instruments once used to measure the stars, there sits a small iron mirror from the 16th century, no larger than a human hand. At first glance, it looks like a scientific tool, something ordinary, harmless. Then you notice the names carved into its surface: Hutzai, Eric, Groman, and at its center, a single name: Floren. The curator, Dr. Müller, unlocked the case for me. She's in her 70s, doesn't smile much. "1 minute," she said, "no photographs." The mirror was heavier than it looked, cold. The kind of cold that doesn't warm up in your hand. I tilted it toward the lamp. The surface was flawless. Not a scratch, not a speck of dust. And for just a second, I swear, something moved in the reflection. Not me, something behind me. I turned around, nothing there. Dr. Mueller took the mirror back, locked it in the case, didn't say a word. We walked toward the exit in silence. Then she stopped. The last curator who handled that mirror quit 3 days later, she said. Didn't give a reason, just left. According to a forgotten ritual from the 15th century, this mirror is not meant to reflect a face. It's meant to summon one. The instructions claim that if the mirror is forged from pure steel, polished until it gleams like a sword and used correctly, a figure will appear in the surface, an armored knight on horseback. He knows the past, he sees the present, and he can reveal the future, but only if you make him speak. This isn't folklore added centuries later. The mirror is real. It exists today behind glass in Dresden's Mathematics Museum, a collection built from the scientific instruments of Saxon astronomers. And the ritual describing it comes from a book that was never meant to be found. It's known as the Munich Handbook of Necromancy. Hidden for centuries in the Bavarian State Library, the manuscript was decoded by a German historian in the 1990s. It's a working manual, hundreds of precise step-by-step instructions from medieval conjurers. Among them are 5 mirror rituals. The most elaborate is devoted to Floren. The ritual begins with purification. The operator must bathe, dress in clean clothes, and prepare the room with offerings. Milk, wine, honey, sprinkled into the air like bait. Then come the scents: aloe, white frankincense, myrrh, and the rarest ingredient of all, ambergris. They were thought to feed spirits, and as if the smoke itself carried energy for the invisible. But the mirror isn't enough. A young boy is required. He holds the steel disc against his chest while a single candle burns nearby. The text describes how the child is guided into a waking trance. As minutes pass, his pupils widen, reflecting the candlelight until his eyes shine like an animal's in the dark. Only then does the incantation begin. It's an entire paragraph of harsh syllables labeled Chaldean. Historians now believe that was deliberate misdirection. It wasn't an ancient language at all, just distorted Arabic. And if the ritual succeeds, the mirror changes. The boy sees a knight on horseback, a squire standing beside him. At first, the knight doesn't speak, but the manual makes a promise. Repeat the ritual 9 times, and the knight will grow bolder. On the final attempt, it will step forward and speak face to face. The Mirror of Floren doesn't promise wealth. It doesn't offer power. It doesn't threaten death. It offers something far more dangerous. A glimpse at the future. Before I left Dresden, I asked Dr. Mueller one last question. Has anyone ever seen something in the mirror without trying the ritual? She looked at me for a long time. We stopped cleaning it, she said. Draw your own conclusions. And today, it sits in plain sight, silent, polished, and waiting for someone who knows what to ask. The Killing Stone. In early March 2022, visitors to Japan's Nasu volcanic zone stumbled upon a shocking sight. The infamous Sesshōseki, or Killing Stone, had split in 2. A shimaniawa, the ritualistic thick rope that once sealed its circumference, now lay loosely on the ground. Photos went viral. Panic followed. The demon fox is loose. This wasn't just superstition. The stone sits in a sulfuric hot spring field in the mountains of Nasu, where toxic gases naturally vent from the earth. Animals have been found dead near it, overcome by fumes. Warning signs surround the area. For centuries, the stone has been feared not just for its story, but for the real possibility that it could kill you. I traveled to Nasu that spring, interviewed a monk who performed the purification ritual after the split. His name is Genshin, mid-60s, calm. This stone is not just legend, he said. Animals die near it. The gas is real. Geologists say rainwater caused the split. That's correct. Do you believe that? He looked at the two halves for a long time. I believe what I see, and what I see is a stone that stayed whole for 1,000 years, then broke the moment the world started falling apart. According to legend, the Sesshōseki is the petrified body of Tamamo no Mei, a beautiful advisor to the emperor in 12th century Kyoto. But she was no ordinary woman. When Emperor Toba fell mysteriously ill, his astrologers revealed the truth. Tamamo was a kitsune, a 9-tailed fox spirit with the power to seduce and destroy. She fled, was hunted, and was ultimately transformed into stone. And now, after nearly 1,000 years of containment, the stone had cracked open. Geologists blamed rainwater and frost, but online, the reaction was fearful. I feel like I've seen something I shouldn't have seen, one tweet read. Others asked, why now? Could the return of this ancient evil be related to the pandemic, the war in Ukraine, or the earthquake off Fukushima? I knelt beside the broken stone, took soil samples. Sulfur dioxide levels were extreme. The ground was hot to the touch. But here's what doesn't add up. The split is clean, almost surgical, like it was cut. One older monk I spoke to, off the record, said, "Stones don't break like that, not from rain." Inside, the surface was smooth, almost hollow. In one version of the myth, a Buddhist monk named Jino once approached the stone and was met by the fox spirit herself. Instead of battling her, he showed compassion. She wept, repented, and vanished. The stone shattered, and its cursed fragments were scattered across Japan, but the largest remained in Nasu, still seeping poison. The site appears in the writings of haiku master Matsuo Basho from the 17th century, who described a carpet of dead bees and butterflies, so thick it covered the ground. I saw the same thing. Dead insects, birds. The gas kills anything close enough. After the 2022 split, Shinto priests performed a purification ritual. But unlike ancient exorcisms, this ceremony sought not to seal the spirit away, but to calm it. Local officials were limited in their response. Because the stone is legally protected as a cultural asset, it can't be altered or removed without national approval. So, it sits there, in 2 pieces, still toxic, still killing. The fox legend isn't uniquely Japanese. In China, she's called Daji, who helped bring down the Shang dynasty. In Korea, she's the Gumiho, eater of hearts. Across borders and centuries, the 9-tailed fox appears at moments of political collapse and social unrest. Perhaps the stone was weakened by time and finally split open. Or perhaps the spirit within finally managed to break free. The gods atop the temple. In November of 1519, at the top of a pyramid that had anchored an empire for 2 centuries, 2 men from Spain walked into a room they would later describe as hell. Hernan Cortés led the way. Bernal Diaz del Castillo, a foot soldier with an eye for detail, followed close enough to remember the smell. He would later describe the scene in his chronicle, The True History of the Conquest of New Spain. They were standing in Tenochtitlan, the largest city in the Americas, a massive metropolis of canals and causeways. They had entered as guests, nervous ones, escorted by priests and nobles, up the steep steps to the Templo Mayor, the sacred heart of the Mexica Empire. Cortés said he wanted to see the gods. It was both a diplomatic lie and a reconnaissance mission. By this point in the campaign, Cortés had already burned his ships to ensure that conquest was the only path forward. There would be no retreat. He allied with rival tribes and walked into the city of his enemy without firing a shot. Days later, he would take the emperor hostage. But first, he needed to see what ruled from the summit. The inner chamber was dim. Diaz compared it to a hall sealed from daylight, a place reserved for priests. There, he wrote, stood 2 colossal idols on raised altars. The first was the sun god, patron of war, armored in gold and feathers, wrapped in serpents, his body covered with jewels. The second was the night god, lord of fate, his eyes set with shining black mirrors. Around them stood smaller figures, serpent tails, obsidian blades. The walls, he said, were blackened not by smoke alone, but by blood. Incense burned, and offerings lay scattered. Somewhere nearby hung a massive drum whose sound, he claimed, could be heard for miles. To a Christian soldier raised on medieval demonology, the scene required no translation. Cortez supplied one anyway. He turned to Moctezuma and said that the idols were evil spirits called devils. He asked permission to tear them down and place a cross at the summit instead. Moctezuma protested. "These were not devils," he replied. "These gods brought rain, harvests, health, victory. Remove them, and the city would unravel." What followed was less theology than strategy. Diaz later admitted they debated pretending to topple the idols just enough to frighten the city, settling for a safer prize. Permission to place a crucifix and an image of Mary on the great temple. For a brief, uneasy time, a Christian image did stand near the gods, a symbolic takeover of the empire's spiritual engine. In the months that followed, this fragile truce cracked, tensions deepened, then snapped during the Toxcatl massacre, and the city descended into war. Months later, as the city erupted, the Spaniards fought their way up the same temple steps. Diaz says they set the shrine ablaze, burning the chamber that once held the idols. Whether the figures themselves were consumed by fire or dismantled in the destruction that followed is uncertain. They survive only in accounts like Diaz's. The temple itself was toppled soon after the conquest, its stones repurposed for the colonial city, its mysteries buried beneath the cathedral. I stood at the excavation site beneath Mexico City's cathedral at night, alone. The base of the pyramid is still visible. You can see where the steps led up. Mexico City hums around it. Cars, lights, noise. But standing there, you feel it. The weight of what happened. I spoke with Dr. Elena Lopez, an archaeologist at the site. She showed me a cross-section of the altar stone, layers. Chemical tests confirmed human blood, preserved in the volcanic rock. "How many?" I asked. "Thousands, over centuries." Dr. Lopez told me something before I left. People ask if the gods were demons, if the Spaniards were right. What do you say? The gods demanded blood. The Spaniards spilled just as much. Different names, same result. But the image lingers. Two immense figures, one of war, one of night, staring out from a blood-darkened sanctum as a small band of invaders declared them demons, unwittingly lighting the fire that consumed an empire. Baphomet and the Templar Head. In 1307, as the sun rose over Paris, royal guards stormed monasteries, castles, and commanderies across France, arresting every Knight Templar they could find. Soon after, the Inquisition claimed to have uncovered a satanic conspiracy at the heart of Christendom's most elite military order. Among the charges, the Knights had worshipped a severed bearded head, an idol they called Baphomet. The Knights Templar were once the pride of Christian Europe, monastic warriors founded after the First Crusade to guard pilgrims in the Holy Land. Bound by vows of chastity and poverty, they wore a red cross over white robes and grew wealthy, managing gold and land across Europe. But by the early 14th century, the Templars had lost their primary purpose. The Muslims had retaken Jerusalem, and the Knights, now financiers to kings, had outlived their political usefulness. King Philip IV of France, deeply in debt to the order, found an expedient solution: destroy them. On Friday, October 13th, 1307, he ordered the mass arrest of every Templar in France. Under interrogation, many confessed to heresy and idol worship. Their supposed idol, a mysterious head named Baphomet, became the centerpiece of the charges. The descriptions, however, were wildly contradictory. One Templar claimed it was a wooden carving, another said it was silver-covered and had 4 legs. Some described a cat with 3 faces, others the embalmed head of John the Baptist. One knight even said the head spoke to him, offering warnings before a battle. I visited the National Archives in Paris. Underground, fluorescent lights humming. A historian named Claire Rousseau showed me documents, Inquisition records, torture confessions, all describing the same thing, a severed head. Curiously, investigators did find silver heads among Templar possessions, including one item carefully catalogued as head number 58. But this object doesn't match the lurid rumors. It's described not as a bearded demon, but as a finely made silver head with the figure of a woman, and it contained fragments of an actual human skull. Claire showed me the inventory. "Read that," she said. "A finely made silver head depicting a woman, contains fragments of a human skull. That's it? That's what they found." Officially, such objects were reliquaries, containers for the remains of saints. Yet, in the accusations, this head was said to possess strange powers, to heal the sick, attract wealth, or even make crops grow. Claire leaned back. Pure propaganda. Philip needed justification to seize their assets. And the name Baphomet? She smiled. A mistake. During the Crusades, French knights heard Muslims shouting battle cries. "Muhammad! Muhammad!" They misheard it as Baphomet. To medieval Christians, Islam was seen not as a rival faith, but a heresy, and Muhammad became synonymous with devil worship. Dozens of knights were burned at the stake, including Grand Master Jacques de Molay. At the pyre, he recanted his confession and died proclaiming his innocence. According to legend, he cursed both the Pope and the king as he burned. Within a year, both men were dead. Centuries later, in 2001, a Vatican archivist uncovered the Chinon parchment, a secret record showing that Pope Clement V had quietly absolved the Templars of heresy, but the crown burned them anyway. As for Baphomet, the name may have originated during the Crusades. The fearsome head that haunted the Inquisition's imaginations was likely a misunderstood religious relic. Its legend twisted under false accusations and reshaped over centuries. The Baphomet we recognize today, the horned figure found in tarot decks and occult art, has almost nothing to do with the Knights Templar. No medieval source describes horns or a goat-headed idol. I asked Claire one final question before leaving. "Do you think they worshipped anything? Anything at all?" She looked at the stacks of documents, then at me. "I think they were as soldiers who became bankers, and a king who wanted their gold. But the head was convenient. 5 objects, 5 mysteries, a letter dictated by Satan, a mirror that summons knights, a stone that split after 1,000 years, gods that demanded blood at the top of an empire, a head that never existed. I've held some of these, stood where others were found, talked to the people who guard them. Some mysteries have answers, propaganda, geology, misunderstanding, but some carry weight that facts can't touch. Sister Maria's letter has sections still untranslated, the message incomplete. The Mirror of Floren still sits in Dresden, waiting. The killing stone is in 2 pieces, still leaking poison. The Templo Mayor stones were scattered across a colonial city. The blood, however, remains in the rock. And Baphomet, a name that refuses to die. Which one do you think has a real explanation? And which one still doesn't make sense? I'm Cat Witness, and I'm watching.